Ladies and gentlemen, dear Freiraum partners, dear friends and colleagues. It's a pleasure to welcome you today online to the 2020 Freiraum Festival. In my capacity as Secretary General of the Goethe Institute, I'm used to being on the road. I'm in and out of airports and hotels all the time. Traveling is part of my day-to-day life. These are the words with which I opened the previous Freiraum Festival in Berlin back in March 2019. A lot has changed since then. The coronavirus pandemic has turned our lives and social interaction upside down. Things we used to take for granted can no longer be taken for granted. Open borders and unhindered travel within the European Union have been subject to restrictions for several months now. Lockdowns and curfews are in place. Physical interaction with other people circumscribed by social distancing rules. The exception has become the norm. But the corona pandemic isn't the only major challenge facing Europe these days. Euroscepticism has gained ground in many countries in recent years. So have populist and nationalist parties, which have taken over the reins of government in some countries and are chipping away at the very foundations of democracy, especially the rule of law and freedom of the press. The present Freiraum Festival is part of the Goethe Institute's programs during the German presidency of the EU Council. The Goethe Institute's contributions to the cultural program during that presidency explore the question, how will Europe be defined in future? And how can European cohesion prevail even in the coronavirus era? Various debates and artistic projects will help shore up European diversity and the creation of a shared European public sphere. Taking a firm stand for Europe is crucial to the Goethe Institute because we see ourselves as a European cultural institution. This commitment is expressed not only in our collaborative projects with the EU itself, but also in our support for European structures, like UNIC or More Europe. But it goes deeper than that, for Europe is what we're all about. The Brexit referendum in June 2016 provided yet another clear-cut expression of skepticism about the European Union. So we decided that the Goethe Institute had to take a stand on these divisive developments. In early 2017, we came up with the idea of a Europe-wide project to facilitate and promote dialogue and solidarity by bringing together many people from different countries. For this purpose, the Goethe Institute was able to make use of its tried and tested competence, a competence in creating open forums for exchange between members of civil society, experts, and of course artists, as well as in kindling and nurturing artistic production. Over 40 Goethe Institutes and over 50 partner organizations in Europe's arts and cultural scene and civil society joined forces to explore various aspects of the concept of freedom together. At several workshops and meetings over the past 3 years, the participants have investigated and discussed in depth 5 main threats: freedom of speech and opinion and artistic freedom, public space in European cities, the diversity of contemporary societies, the rise of populism and nationalism, and last but not least, the impact of economic conditions on freedom. The first step involved randomly pairing off the participating cities during the kick-off meeting in Warsaw in December 2017. And I remember this meeting very well because I met already many of the Freiraum partners in Poland. The chosen partners then developed and implemented projects in tandem. The object was to create a space in which artists and experts in various fields of endeavor and from different European countries could meet up and interact. That wasn't always easy, especially as the participants didn't know one another beforehand and hailed from all over Europe with different historical and cultural backgrounds and different perspectives on the world. But they struck up a conversation and kept the dialogue going in one event after another, including project development sessions and presentations in 2018 and 2019, the 2019 Freiraum Festival in Berlin, workshops on the 5 main threads in Thessaloniki and Bratislava, and multiple online meetings in the run-up to the present Freiraum Festival. I remember very well my visits in Skopje and Carlisle during our long-running Freiraum project. The project partners are now in the process of turning Freiraum into an autonomous network in which we will continue to play an advisory role. What do we need this Freiraum network for? One participant from a European country that is increasingly cracking down on freedom of speech once said she needs to use the Freiraum network as a mouthpiece, especially if she won't be allowed to speak her mind publicly in future. This and many other comments I've heard about the Freiraum project underscore the potential for such a transdisciplinary pan-European network. For now, however, I'm looking forward with you to 3 days of exciting debates and artistic interventions about the state of freedom in Europe today. The Freiraum Festival program breaks down as follows. Today's spotlight will be on the state of freedom in Europe in the coronavirus era. The Bulgarian political scientist Ivan Krastev will be giving a keynote talk on this subject to kick off the festival. Afterwards, I look forward to discussing the new post-lockdown normal with Krastev and the distinguished sociologist Eva Illus. Our debate, produced in association with the German public broadcaster ARD, will be moderated by Matthias Krupa of the German weekly Die Zeit. Another special highlight on today's lineup is a performance of the Freyro Manifesto. Day 1 of the Freiraum Festival will close with a performance of the Freiraum Rhapsody by composer Fatos Kerimai from Tirana and the artist Edith Pula. The festival will resume tomorrow with contributions about the state of freedom in Europe today, the ongoing biopolitical crisis, social movements, and emerging solidarities. The program on day 2 will also feature Eva Illus's keynote on Can the Home be a Haven from a World in Crisis? Reflections on the politics of COVID-19. The third and last day of the festival will be devoted to the state of the arts, new formats and audiences. I'm happy that we have a great lineup of artistic projects on this third day. And don't forget that in addition to this online Freiraum Festival, a number of local physical events will be held in a score of European cities. Before the program events get underway, I'd like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly thank all those who have made this festival possible for their hard work and support. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Freiraum partners and especially the curatorial team for their unflagging commitment. Without you, the project would never have come about in its present form. I'd like to give special thanks to Artbox Creative Arts Management, in particular Christos Savidis and Lydia Katsiakovu for their untiring efforts. I'd also like to thank the Freiraum Project Management and the Goethe Institute project team, namely Alona Elizalde, Tanja Vital-Dürkop, Benjamin Panten, Rudolf Bartsch, Aris Kalogiros, Hanna Kovalo and Marie Kiwe. And I'd like to extend my very special thanks to project coordinator Maud Kamar, who has driven the project Freiraum forward with great commitment and passion from the very start. And thanks to all my colleagues at the Goethe Institutes in Europe who have supported the projects over the past few years and continue to support it now. In my introduction to the last Freiraum Festival in Berlin, I mentioned my travels, which always gave me an opportunity to meet and draw inspiration from interesting people. The coronavirus pandemic has taught me that meaningful encounters can be had online too. Although, of course, I would prefer to meet you all personally. I hope I, and especially you, will have encounters like that over the next 3 days. I wish all of us a great Freiraum Festival 2020 and look forward to exciting debates and artistic projects.
Good afternoon from me too. It is quite a challenge to briefly present something so complex as the Freiraum Festival 2020. I would like to focus on a few numbers, the numbers behind Freiraum Festival. I would like to mention the 13 hours long online summit, which includes 26 statements and 16 artistic interventions. As Mr. Johannes Ebert mentioned earlier, at the same time with the online program, about 20 local events take place in different cities around Europe. Yes, maybe these are just numbers, but these numbers indicate that Freiraum Festival is a truly decentralized, pan-European hybrid festival. A festival that has no center, but many subjective centers. Every city becomes the center of the festival. Every local event becomes the main event of the festival. For the online summit, our aim was to break the Zoom format, so we designed and we propose a new format that combines techniques and technologies that are easily accessible almost to everybody, and it is obvious how useful a format like this can be during the COVID-19 crisis. But Freiraum is not only numbers and formats and concepts. It is a very useful tool. Let me explain that. It is a rare case in the cultural sector for an established institution such as the Goethe Institute to support a project until it becomes self-sustainable and then let it go in the hands of other actors while continuing to be part of it. This is a great gift and a huge opportunity. Especially because of the pandemic crisis, Freiraum can become a very powerful tool, a device that strengthens the voices of the involved actors from culture, education, science, and civil society, giving them the opportunity to actively contribute to the discussion that has already begun towards the shaping of a new reality. The arts and culture community must be part of this conversation. Otherwise, decisions will be made by others and a historically unique opportunity will be lost. I believe that Freiraum is an ideal tool to create a free space in order for the voice of the artists and creatives to be articulated and heard. I'm really proud to be a member of this community that envisioned and designed this festival. This festival from now on will be an opportunity to showcase what we have achieved, but also to test new formats, ideas, to promote communication between the members, but mainly with and between the local communities. Join us for the next 3 days, but also join us as a member. The platform is open. Allow me to thank the Goethe Institute that gave us the Freiraum, the free space to express, to thank all the partners we worked closely all these months, and all the invited speakers and artists, and of course the professionals that work with us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to the opening day of Freiraum, the Pan-European Hybrid Festival. We are very excited to start this 3 days festival after many months of preparations. We are broadcasting live from Goethe Institute in Thessaloniki in Greece, but also the festival takes place simultaneously in 22 cities across Europe. I am Lidia Hadjiakovou. I am the co-director of Artbox, Creative Arts Management, that is one of the Freiraum partners, and also I was one of the artistic co-directors of the Freiraum Festival.
Hi everybody, I'm Sotirios Bachtsetsis. I'm the research director of Artbox and also a member of the curatorial team of the Freiraum Festival. Together with Lydia, we will guide you through the 3 days program of the festival, live streamed, as we said, from various cities around Europe.
As you see, we are surrounded here in the studio by the crew that is making this possible, thanks to the mobile studio that combines the possibilities and the technologies of a TV studio with that of the video conference platform. This studio has been developed in partnership, of course, with the Goethe Institute Thessaloniki, but also with Hyperwerk Institute for Post-Industrial Design in Basel. Actually, there is a twin studio set up right now in Basel, making sure that we provide an excellent quality of the broadcast. The mobile studio is set within the Freiraum mobile stage. The light installation that you see around me that has been designed to work as a tool in order to activate public spaces and communities, providing a safe ground, a safe space, a Freiraum, so to say, for participatory, performative and collective actions. The Freiraum mobile stage is offered to the Freiraum partners in order to support them in their activities. And actually, in the context of the Freiraum Festival, half of it has been transferred to Brussels, where it has been part of the activities there. Joining Sotirios and myself as the host of the festival are the moderators, journalist Matthias Krupa from Hamburg, artist Liam Gillick in New York, and political scientist Anna Karastathis in Athens, who will also guide you through the discussions and the statements. Also, we have with us 2 artists that are responding in their own language, in their artistic mediums. It is drummer Jorgos Clujos Grisindis, who's actually with us here at the studio, as you can hear. Jorgos provides a sort of improvisational live soundtrack to the whole festival. Also, the same thing, but in a different way, is done by Carol Rollo, who is an illustrator and she is based in Rome. And this is actually the contribution to the festival from the Rome-based partner, institution Dassault. Carol will offer her live drawing commentary of the discussions. The Freiraum Festival is broadcasted live. You can watch it on our website, freiraumfestival.eu, and also on YouTube. The link for that is also available on the website. Please have in mind that the quality may be slightly better if you're watching from our website. And also there you have the possibility to participate in the discussion by submitting questions in the live chat feature that is offered. As we already mentioned, the Freiraum Festival consists of both the online and offline summit. There are 23 activities taking place in 22 cities across Europe, and this is achieved thanks to the collaboration of the entire Freiraum network. These events are revolving around two themes: the state of freedom in Europe today and the state of the arts. The online summit program includes keynote lectures and statements, live discussions, artistic interventions, and content from the local activities. Content produced by the partners is also featured on our online library in the website. This is a specially dedicated page that includes videos, podcasts, and texts, and showcases the variety of institutions involved into the Freiraum network, and also the variety in approaches and thinking and projects that they produce. This page is updated regularly so that it includes the new content as it is being produced. So whether you're watching from a live broadcast spot somewhere in Europe or from your home, we hope that you will enjoy what we have prepared for you, and you will find it both interesting and, most importantly, inspiring. I'm very happy to start the program with a performative reading of the Freyro Manifesto that has been conceived by Jane Datman. Jane is an artist curator and also the Carlisle-based Freiraum partner. Where she is also hosting an event actually that takes place tomorrow, a celebration of artistic expression. The Freyro Manifesto was written collaboratively by a team of Freiraum partners, and it describes the Freiraum platform aspirations, philosophy, and goals. Jane has conceived this performative reading as a way to convey the process of uniting your voice with that of others, and she is joined in this reading by 12 partners representing the entire platform.
Freiraum, to align utopia and praxis. Freiraum is a space for freedom, a space for one to feel safe, angry, critical, accepted, included, respected, and empowered. Freiraum is also a toolkit of practices and a network of actors and places, creating new narratives and alternative futures. To be free demands greater responsibility than to be oppressed. It requires action. Freiraum is not singular, but multiple, and it continuously strives to be presented, articulated, and disseminated as such. We strive towards a space that invites and enables people to be themselves through diversity of pragmatic, actionable, down-to-earth approaches.
Freiraum is a call to the silent, for the silenced to become audible.
Freiraum announces its presence through calls to be more visible and to actively participate in public life, in the squares, the streets, and everywhere people exist politically. Freiraum acknowledges the importance of the message and the historical prominence of the billboard as a place where the story of the world is advertised. In order to go beyond superficial change-making, Freiraum brings content, imagination, and political thinking back to the billboard. Freiraum asks, how can we learn from each other and do small things with great impact? Who can be and who is dissident now? How do we align utopia and praxis, prioritize freedom before necessity, organize the idea, organize the revolt? In search of answers, Freiraum strives to make a step ahead through transgression, diversion, shared responsibility, and subversion.
We want to transform silence and whisper into informed public speech and action.
Public speech and action.
Another response, inspired by the 4 points of the Freyro Manifesto, is an art documentary that was produced by Contrapunkt, the Freiraum partner that is based in Skopje. We will now watch a short preview of the work. The entire work is available in the online library on our website.
Како што се таложат деновите на изолација и забрана за излегување, така се таложат и приказните во светларникот во мојот бел солитер. Допред некој ден сама се симнував и се качував по неколку пати во денот. Наново ги запознавав своите стари комшии според изфрлените предмети наредени на скалите како украси, како тајни, како сведоштва за мојот поранешен некомплетен впечаток за нив. Фрижидерот помеѓу 9-тиот и 10-тиот кат ми е омилена дестинација за одмор. LG. Поцрнет од прашина со скршена рачка за отворање и со траги од многу магнети што некогаш стоеле на него. Но сега стана врв улица. Редовно, со цигара в рака. Ја сретнувам комшиката која не пуши. Налетав и на мојот полничок комшија како јаде мортадела од хартија, скришно, да не го види никој, зашто предпоставувам дека не сме да јаде такви работи дома. Се правам дека не ја забележувам мортаделата. Кимнувам со главата и брзам на кај фрижидерот помеѓу 9-тиот и 10-тиот кат. На него лименка смут, празна. Некој си се напил пиво во светларникот и лименката ја оставил врз фрижидерот, ми каде на друго место. Дека празна, да не ја допил, веројатно ќе ја ставил внатре. Го одминувам фрижидерот и се враќам до него. Го отворам, чудеси внатре. Наредниот пат и јас ќе си оставам нешто, за да имам причина почесто да се симнувам. Точно знам што.
Слободата денес е истото што била и пред 1, 2 или 3 години. Слободата е став. Роб е само оној што чека другите да го ослободат. Тоа што без многу наблюдување и сама анализа не е тешко да се воочи, е дека ставот на луѓето денес е таков што можеме да ги прогласиме за доброволни робови. За мене слободата не е ниту политичка, ниту економска, ниту психолошка, ниту физичка, ако сакате, категорија, туку пред се етичка. Еве, може да тргнеме да зборуваме за секој од тие аспекти на слободата. Во политичка смисла, слободен човек е тој што има право на слободен избор. Но што ако изборот е лош, како што често се случува? Или абстинира, значи доброволно се одрекува од својата слобода, или станува соучесник во своето следно заробување. Дали ќе се согласиме дека слободата е тотално анемична во оваа смисла дури во најразвиените демократии? Веројатно да. Изборот повеќе ни станува некако непожелна обврска, отколку некакво право што не усреќува. Во економска смисла се труби многу за слободниот пазар и повторно за некаква слобода на избор. Слободен пазар денес значи дека секој производ е достапен. И тоа е навистина така. Во смисла на тоа дека може да се купи, тука е на тезгата во излогот. но дали ние сме навистина слободни во нашиот избор? Мислам дека не сме. И тоа од две причини. Прво, нашиот мозок е затруен од пропаганда и одамна.
So as I mentioned before, this was a very short preview of this work called 5 Stories About Freedom that has been produced by Iskra Gesoska and Contrapunkt, the Freiraum partner that is based in Skopje. The film basically combines theoretical, documentary and artistic discourses which can be complementary or contradictory. I think it is really worth to watch it and as I said, it is available on our online library. Moving on and concluding this selection of videos that are inspired or based on the Freiraum Manifesto, we will now watch a short statement by Themis Christofidou from the European Commission.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear artists and friends, I thank you for organizing this important festival and for bringing Europeans together even under these difficult circumstances. It is a pleasure to receive your Freiraum Manifesto, this important and powerful call for action. I want to thank the artists who wrote it, the project participants, Beaux-Arts for hosting the festival, and the Goethe Institute for leading this project. Indeed, Freiraum, free space, is something that we must treasure and fight for constantly. Freedom in all its forms, from the political to the artistic, is a cornerstone of the European project. It was the EU founding fathers' dream to create a peaceful European space. A space where the fundamental rights and freedoms of our citizens are not a privilege, but a given. And yet, more than 60 years later, we cannot take these achievements for granted. Rights and freedoms come under attack again and again. And it requires vigilance, determination, and often courage to respond. Protecting artistic expression from political interference, from censorship, and from any other type of pressure is paramount. We cannot build the common European cultural space without it. We cannot preserve the diversity of our culture and the cohesiveness of our communities unless we protect artistic expression. Our partnership with the cultural and creative sectors and with local authorities is essential to reach these goals. This is why I applaud your initiative to use a locally grounded global perspective in order to foster freedom in the public space. As your manifesto rightly says, we need to look into how we can learn from each other and do small things with great impact. Projects such as this one help us connect to each other in an honest and free manner. We need artistic expression to help bridge the gaps between us, to bring us together. And we need all the critical voices. The voices that remind us again and again that we have to be vigilant and to protect this free space. The space where we can indeed feel safe, feel angry, critical, accepted, included, respected, and empowered. Thank you.
Our today's keynote speaker is political scientist Ivan Krastev, who will discuss the state of freedom in the post-COVID world.
So it's a great pleasure, but also, honestly speaking, a challenge to address you without seeing you. So for me, this is the new normal, talking to people that you don't see. And this probably is best capturing the situation in which we all have found ourselves in the last months. In an old, popular Jewish joke, a husband sends a telegram to his wife, and the telegram reads, "Start worrying, details to follow." And I do believe this is very much how many of us feel today. We know that something is changing. We know that something is changing with the way we live and with our sense of freedom. We don't know exactly what is changing. We have our hopes, we have our fears, but we believe that the best is to start worrying and then to look for the details. So what I'm planning to do in this opening address is just to address 5 simple questions that probably can help us continue discussing later. And the first is, how new is the new normal? On one level, it looks that everything has changed. It is enough to go to the airports, we're totally empty. It's enough to see all the people with masks everywhere, to have the feeling that something dramatically has changed. And if you go to literature, you're going to see that quite often the stories of plagues and the stories of pandemics have been used by the writers to tell the story of society losing their freedoms. But in one of my favorite books when it comes to pandemics, and I mean Saramago's novel Blindness, he's telling a slightly more interesting story about all this. Like all this dystopia, this is a story about the pandemics. People start losing their sight. The government started to isolate the people who have been infected. So this is a kind of a classical story of loss of freedom. But at the moment when the pandemic is over and people start seeing again, one of the major characters basically realizes that we all were not seeing even before when, as if we could see. And my first argument is that when we're talking about the new normal, it is quite important to understand that it's not simply that the pandemic changed things, but it is also allows us to see things that have changed already. From this point of view, the COVID-19 was not so much a disruptor, but an amplifier. Many of the changes that we are basically experiencing today have been on the way, and simply basically the virus put them on the speed train. And you can see it everywhere. For example, surveillance. Now many people really fear that what is happening around us is that surveillance and the surveillance state is becoming the new normal. But it's enough to look around and to see that we have been living with the surveillance states for a while. Simply it became much more visible today. Or when people start to fear about deglobalization, you're going to see that it was with us in the several years before. Simply, we were not ready to notice many of the changes going on. And this is my first argument. And the argument is that the new normal that we are seeing, in fact, is not as different than the old normal, but now we're experiencing it in a very profound way. And the question is how long it can go, how much this personal experience that we have, and which is not finished yet, and this is a crisis that basically is not over, and we don't know how it is going to finish, how much it is going to change our life in the long run. And here history books tells us something that basically no medical expert can tell us. And this is that pandemics have been as transformative for the way we're living, in the way wars and revolutions have been. But we know how to remember wars and revolutions, and we don't know how to remember pandemics. There are 400 books published about the Spanish flu, regardless of the fact that Spanish flu has killed 2 or 3 times more people than the World War I. But there are 80,000 books in different languages about the World War I. Because the biggest problem with the pandemic is that there is no narrative. There is no heroic narrative to explain what we are doing. Even now, how we are saving humanity by staying home and not seeing people. So this is also the new form of solidarity. If you care about somebody, don't see him, don't touch her or him. So this is why I do believe that this type of experience that we have now probably is going to fade away. What is not going to fade away is going to be the new institutional realities and certain type of practices that we're very much going to be used to. The second question that is quite often asked when it comes to the state of freedom and the new normal is, who is winning in this competition between democracies and authoritarian regimes when it comes to containing the pandemic? And there was this kind of an incredibly rising fear that authoritarian regimes are doing better. The crisis is not over, and it is, before it is over, you never know who is winning. Secondly, when you decide who is winning, it's not enough just to see the number of infected and the number of people who have died. You should also look for some of the economical impact of this crisis. You should see for the mental state of society after the crisis is over. But at least what we know for the moment is that the nature of the political regime is not the one that really determines who is going to do best in responding to the pandemics. Paradoxically, when it comes to the pandemic and the government's response to it, three other factors turn to be more important than either democracy or authoritarian regime. And one is the level of the social trust in society. The other is effectiveness of the state. And the third is the experience with the previous crisis, which explains why some of the Asian countries are doing better than some of the European countries or the United States. So as a result of it, it's not that democracies are failing. There are some democracies that are doing pretty well. Taiwan is doing incredibly well. South Korea is doing fine. Denmark is quite successful. And there are some democracies that are failing. But from the point of view of symbolic politics, the biggest story is that China is doing well, while the United States is failing. And I do believe that while basically there is no any kind of a strong evidence to push people to believe that authoritarian regimes are doing better, they're going to be this perception because of the failure of the United States that democracies are losing. On the other side, there was this kind of two fears in the beginning of the pandemics, which turned to be wrong. One was that because this pandemic injected societies with fear, and because authoritarian leaders very much masters of the politics of fear, so we can expect that this type of authoritarian leaders are going to be the biggest beneficiaries. It is not true. Look at Brazil, look at Belarus with Lukashenko, look at Russia, look at Modi, and you're going to understand that in fact, authoritarian leaders like crisis, but not crisis like this. Because the most important freedom that every authoritarian leader wants is to choose the crisis of his own liking. Mostly, they like crisis that they're manufacturing themselves. And this is not a crisis like this. The virus is not an enemy that you can defeat. This is a problem that you should solve. And this type of authoritarian leaders are not great at problem solving, and also they don't know how to share power, even how to share power with the medical doctors. So from this point of view, this is not a crisis that came as a God's gift to the authoritarians. This is also not a God's gift to the populists, like many feared in the beginning, because populism is much more rooted in anxiety than in fear. So when you fear everything, you try to find political leaders to express how you feel about the world. But when your fear goes much more concrete, when you fear basically being infected and dying, it is very different. And from this point of view, all over Europe at least, the populists are losing. And they're losing also because most of the populist parties in Europe have been anti-immigration parties. And suddenly, as a result of the COVID-19, the migration stopped to be the most burning issues for many of the voters. It kind of frees the movement of people. And here I'm moving to my third question. What is the most important thing of our experience of freedom that we discovered as a result of this crisis? And my feeling is that for the first time, basically, we see this kind of decoupling between the freedom of movement and our sense of freedom. suddenly our freedom of movement is constrained. It's constrained by governments, it's constrained by our own fears. So we should rediscover the freedom, which is not simply the freedom of movement, that we can go from here to there. So we are kind of also pushed to find a different meaning of our freedom. And this is one of the paradoxical story about all new normal. It, in my view, also exposes one of the critical facts of the state of freedom in the old normal, namely that we have been enjoying quite a lot of freedoms as citizens. I'm talking particularly for the Western democracies, but our freedom was not related to our power as individuals, to our power as voters. Paradoxically, we feel powerless while at the same time we feel kind of free enough. And now this kind of a disconnect between our sense of power, our sense that we can really shape events, and the sense of freedom is becoming much more painful and kind of a much more seen than ever before. So I'm going to end up, because many people believe that because of the fact the state of emergency has been introduced in most of the European democracies, this is going to be the moment in which the democratic regimes are going to be totally dismantled, and that the governments are going to benefit very much from this. My reading on this is slightly different. I had the feeling that the relations between the governments and citizens at the time of pandemic very much reminds me of the old children's game of truth or dare, where basically you're either asked to reveal some uncomfortable truth about yourself or to do something daring, something that before you were never going to dare to do. So from this point of view, the governments became very visible, and because they became very visible, and nevertheless that as if they have a much more instruments to restrict the citizens, they became also much more vulnerable. And I'm going to give you just two examples. One is, yes, the state of emergency had been imposed in many of the EU member states, but at the same time, basically people all the time start to compare what is happening in their countries with what is happening in the neighboring countries. So this is very difficult for any government basically to try to use this situation for concentrating much more power if the trend is changing in other countries. If you are not lifting the restrictions when others are doing, then people are becoming particularly suspicious against their own government. And secondly, one of the things that I very much feared in the beginning was the fact that people simply cannot go together on the street. Because protest has took such an important role in our politics and our understanding of freedom, that I was afraid because of the COVID-19, because of the fact that people fear infections, that some of the protests have been banned. This could be one of the major losses that we're going to get into this period. But here comes the paradox. Exactly because you are taking such a risk to go to protest, regardless, are you protesting against the authoritarian regime of Lukashenko, or you have some of these anti-mask protests here and there, the protests are becoming more important. People are looking at them in a different way exactly because you have these risks that makes them much more meaningful. And these protests, of course, are not speaking for the majority of the people, and some of them, personally, I don't feel in agreement with, but they are, in my view, touching, and I want to end up on this, in some very important change in the way the problem of freedom and democratic politics are functioning. Protests are not about numbers and majorities that oppose this government or these policies. They're about the intensity of disagreement. This is how intensively people disagree. And because elections makes us those who basically are very much interested in politics and those who are not, all of us has only one vote. This is the protest that allows us to express the intensity of our political sentiments. I want to end up on this because I don't believe that at this moment we know are we going to gain freedom or lose freedom in the post-COVID-19 world. But I do believe that what this crisis did is push us to think about freedom in a different way.
Well, I believe that Professor Krastev has actually touched upon some very important issues. Of course, I don't think it's possible to summarize what he said, but maybe it would be interesting to focus on 2 or 3 points. I found interesting the issue concerning pandemics. And as Professor Krastev maintained, although pandemics have the same transformative power as wars and revolutions, actually we lack the means to have a historical memory of them, the narrative of those pandemics. Perhaps, as he maintained as well, because these heroic narratives related to wars cannot be seen as part of the narrative of the pandemic. Maybe also the second point, which I found personally very interesting, is that the COVID-19 crisis was not a disruptor, but actually an amplifier of already existing conditions. For example, the surveillance state or the notion of deglobalization. A third point, and a very interesting one, is that basically we all have discovered that freedom doesn't mean just freedom of movement, but maybe it's an incentive to make us actually think more about what freedom is really about. And most importantly, even the fourth last point, that despite the confinement measurements, people keep participating in demonstrations and protests in public space. This is also one of the means actually to express and perform democratic feelings and democratic sentiments, democratic actions. And in a very interesting, let's say, turn, we will say that actually it is due to the pandemic, I'm following hopefully the line of thought of Professor Krastev, that we became more aware of political actions, because now they are somehow dangerous, they become more meaningful. As he said, it's not about numbers, but it's about intensity. So I believe in a way, maybe the pandemic made us actually understand that we probably, hopefully, we move past the post-democratic condition in which voting is not important anymore. And we came to realize, or we're coming to realize actually, that we still have a voice, and this voice should be practiced. This is how I see it, at least.
Well, Professor Krastev was going to join us for a live discussion, but he couldn't make it, so we will need to move on to the next item in the program. Actually, several of the Freiraum partners have been exploring the issue of freedom through the urgency of the current situation. The Goethe Institute in Brussels, in collaboration with Beaux-Arts and Berschauburg, produced a series of texts on the issue of the freedom of press in Europe today, as well as an interview with economist and philosopher Philippe Van Pares from Brussels. Also, the Temporary Academy of Arts in Athens, together with the local Goethe Institute there, produced a publication on humanitarian and ethical issues in relation also to justice and the refugee crisis. And H21 in Prague, together with the local Goethe Institute there, is hosting tomorrow a discussion on polarization, freedom of expression, and changes in society. The information on this particular local event that is open to the public is also on our website. I will keep reminding you this throughout the next 3 days, freiraumfestival.eu. You can find it under the local events.
So, we switch now to our first roundtable discussion. We go to Hamburg. A new normal after the lockdown? Freedom and Europe in the post-corona era. A discussion moderated by journalist Matthias Krupa from the journal Die Zeit.
I'm very pleased to welcome you to an extraordinary debate in extraordinary times and in an extraordinary, or at least unusual, setting. This debate is part of the Pan-European Freiraum Festival, which is organized by the Goethe Institute, together with many partners in the framework of Germany's EU Council presidency. The festival is dedicated to the question, which is the state of freedom in Europe? We are doing this debate in the format of the Neue Wir-Erzählungen, a serial of debates which are organized by the Brussels Goethe-Institut, the Brussels office of the German broadcaster ARD, and the German weekly Die Zeit. Normally, this format takes place in Brussels, but today none of our guests can be in Brussels, so we are pre-recording this debate at 4 different places. Our first guest is Eva Illus, who is joining us from Paris. She is professor of sociology in Paris at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. Maybe we come back to the question what it means in Corona times to teach at a university. She is author of many highly regarded and award-winning books, modern classics in the field of sociology. I just want to mention one. It is Cold Intimacies, The Making of Emotional Capitalism. Our second guest in Munich is Johannes Ebert. Johannes Ebert has studied Islamic studies, among others, in Damascus before he joined the Goethe Institute. He worked for the Institute in Latvia, in the Ukraine, in Cairo, and in Moscow. Since 2012, he is Secretary General of the Goethe Institute, which means not only one of the highest ranking, but also one of the most experienced German experts in the field of cultural exchange. Very welcome. And last but not least, in Vienna, Ivan Krastev, political scientist, author, essayist. This year he was awarded the Jean-Emery Prize for European Essays, a very distinguished expert, if I may say so, in matters of freedom and European affairs. Already in June, Ivan published a book about the paradoxes of the pandemic, first in German and now it is available in English as well. The title is It Tomorrow Yet? My name is Matthias Krupa. I'm European editor of the German weekly Die Zeit and working here in Hamburg, where we are in the Mediothek of the Goethe Institute. A debate at 4 places, an unusual setting, really. Is it still unusual for us to talk to each other in this way? Or haven't we got used to sitting in front of screens, conferencing via video, being together without being really together? Is the hybrid world already the new normal? That is exactly what we want to discuss about. In which way has the pandemic changed our life, our societies, maybe the world? And how might it look like, the new normal after the lockdown, whenever this after will be? Of course, and I want to stress it before, there will be no final answers in this debate. How could they? But I'm sure we have the right panelists to get a better understanding of the situation we are in right now. In the first round, I would like to start and ask all of our panelists for their personal experiences. Eva Illus, maybe if you want to start, how far has this pandemic affected your daily life beyond the technical question of wearing masks?
Well, one may say that whatever is called my life has been severely disrupted since I normally commute between Jerusalem and Paris. So that, I would say, lifestyle has been entirely disrupted. I was forced to take refuge for 7 months in Jerusalem, in my home, when the pandemic started. And I'm now for a few months already in Paris. So the happy times where I could take the plane every week or every 2 weeks is over, at least for now. So that's a severe disruption. But I would say, you know, beyond facts, and all of us, I think, can find a lot of facts that have changed. I think what has fundamentally changed is the presence of a new cognition, which was not present before. And that cognition is an awareness of the presence of viruses, not only the coronaviruses, but I became aware for the first time, really, in my life, of the world of bacteria and viruses and germs in a way that I was not before. So that even the flu has now become, has acquired a kind of cognitive prevalence, which it didn't use to have before. So, and this is beyond the fact that all of us have experienced, namely the fact that I see my children much less, the fact that I feel more comfortable meeting with strangers on the screen rather than face to face, etc. So it's this new awareness of a world that was always with us, but which who doctor and infectiologists are aware of, but which I was not really aware of. I didn't live with that world, and now I live with it.
Johannes Ebert, maybe you want to step in and tell us a little bit about your experiences, be it in your daily life, be it in your daily work, because the Goethe Institute is working all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing when we took this virus serious was in January, when we heard from our colleagues in China that they had to close down their institute in Peking and transfer all the classes to the digital. And from that moment on, we knew that something was going on. And already in February, we created a crisis center for the institute. And I have to say, in March, I thought in the beginning, oh, wow, home offices, there's much more time now. But then things went so very fast. It was our task to secure the operations abroad. Because you have to answer questions like, what do we do with colleagues who are part of the risk groups who are abroad? Or questions like, how do we teach 3,000 teachers to teach in the digital the German language? So there were many things going on parallelly where we had to react. And of course, we had to secure the financial situation of the institute, because a third of our income we make by language courses and exams. So I was sitting at home 3 months in the home office in front of a screen from 8 to 5 in the afternoon, and was much more tired in the evening than with normal meetings. I think this is an experience that everybody has. And as I'm traveling very much normally, I had to get used to stay at home. I have 3 children. They were all at home. My oldest son, he's 18. He was preparing for his final class. And so we were discussing who is cleaning up the apartment and how do we organize our daily life. We have a squirrel on the balcony, which at the end of the home office was eating from my hand. And then I thought, this is much too long staying at home. And I started to go to the office again. And actually right now I try to go 3-4 times a week, because I feel much better meeting people, communicating lively. And this is important for me. And this was not possible in the first phase of the crisis.
We will come back to the question what it really means to be at home. But maybe first, Ivan, you are now back in Vienna, if I got it right, during the lockdown in spring. Maybe we should say during the first lockdown in spring. You went back to Bulgaria.
Yeah, this was the first thing that came, because in the beginning of March, our daughter was in Spain. We have been in Vienna. And then come the question, where, and we basically realized that they're going to be locked down. We didn't know for how long. Where do you want to be locked down? And my wife said, I suddenly starts to feel like a Jew in the late 30s in Vienna. Basically, where you should go. Should we stay? Should you leave? And we decided to go back. And I do believe from this point of view, this is the first question that came, interestingly enough. You can live in different places, but when you ask to stay home, the question is, where is home? And this is not basically where do you have an apartment or where you're renting an apartment, but where you feel there. So we went there and we spent 70 days in the Bulgarian countryside. And I should confess that I even felt guilty, because it was a kind of a peaceful time for us. The number of infected people in Bulgaria, like in Central and Eastern Europe, was very low in this first wave, very different than what we see today. But then you start looking around and talking about what changed in my life. Of course, one is traveling. I discovered that between March and May, I had to cancel 14 flights. And then you realize how much you're traveling, because you know basically that you're traveling, but you don't really guess it. And secondly, even when I fly 2 or 3 times during this time, you understand that the airports has become one of the most depressive places you can see. Almost empty, everything closed. This is like, you remember in the 1980s at least, there was this fear of the neutron bomb, which is going to keep the material world, but it is going just to destroy the people. And you have this strange feeling that this virus is not, of course, killing as many people as, for example, the Spanish flu. It's not destroying buildings, but it is destroying way of lives. And the airport is the place to see it. And I should be honest, I don't like much this kind of a Zoom world for 3 very kind of a simple and particular reasons. One is, when you go in all these Zoom talks, you understand how repetitive you are. You ask the same questions, and when you're asking these questions in different environments, when you're talking to different people, at least you have the illusion that you're saying something different. And then basically now, when you're watching the screen, you're exposed to basically the repetitiveness of what we're doing and how we are living. Secondly, it's very difficult to refuse, because people are telling you, what, you cannot just give us 1 hour for this or that. So suddenly, instead of working less, you have the feeling that you are working more. But certainly, and I'm going to end up on this, what I'm really lacking in this kind of a Zoom world is accidental meetings. I never was a great lover of conferences, but I always liked the coffee breaks at the conferences. You go there, you meet somebody accidentally, you're going to have really something interesting. And now, anytime you know whom you're meeting on Zoom and why you're meeting. And for me, this was a kind of a radical change, some kind of a world without accidents I found less exciting.
But I have the same experience with the Zoom conferences, because today I said to one of my colleagues, I have much more to do than before, and I don't know how I did this when I was still traveling, because about 1/3 of my time I'm traveling. But on the other hand, the Zoom conferences give us the possibility to communicate. And when I look at our institution, I think it was very, very important that we communicate much more than before. Of course, the basic of this communication, that we knew each other from physical meetings, so there's a certain trust and a certain knowledge of each other. But I have the feeling now we're doing assemblies of our whole stuff worldwide with 1,000 people joining in the Zoom conference. And I think this is an added value that we didn't have before, and that I want to take in the time when someday Corona may be over, because it gives us the possibility of a more frequent communication. And my feeling was that this was much more important than before. Maybe the quality of the communication is not as deep as when you meet in person, but at least you can affirm the other that you are here, that you know what's going on, that you want to know what's going on, that we go together through this situation. So I think this was the advantage of the digital media that we used, and this was important for me. Also, I share the feeling that I have nearly a Zoom panel every day, and I would prefer to meet you all in person and have the coffee afterwards in the break. But maybe we will do that after, when Corona is getting weaker and we can travel and meet again.
So Ivan said that he misses accidental meetings. I would say that what I miss most perhaps is, maybe it's a different way to say the same thing as meetings with strangers. And in fact, when you think of it, strangers really are, if you follow Zimmel, for example, the stranger is a part of the fabric of modern life. The possibility of coming in contact with a lot of unknown people and, in fact, trusting them. This is the added dimension. Looking at the stranger as a non-enemy, as what Zimmel calls an indifferent stranger. This has dramatically changed, because the stranger is now potentially an enemy. a biological enemy, a very different kind of enemies than in a pre-modern world, but it can be, or that stranger can be potentially an enemy. And that, I think, is for me the most dramatic change.
I totally agree. And this is interesting.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Ivan? I'm sorry.
I totally agree with you, because in a certain way, this is also very much changing the very idea of solidarity. What it means to be in solidarity with somebody. These days, it means not to meet him or her. You're caring about people, but by not seeing them. And this kind of a paradox, and I understand it, and I understand how it worked, and so on. But this gets you something of this best of life, and even talking about the Zoom conferences. One thing that I'm lacking a lot is sense of irony. When you're in a normal kind of a panel, and you're seeing people next to you, the jokes comes naturally. You're doing this because of the pleasure. Joking in the virtual space, this is not the same, simply honestly speaking.
I mean, the same problem is if you get emotional in a virtual space, you don't see the reaction, which makes me very insecure at certain moments, because people sometimes put off their cameras, and then you're speaking not only to video, but to photos. And sometimes you want to, you are emotional. In meetings, I want to be emotional at certain points. But if I don't get the immediate reaction, I get very insecure. And of course, this is much better in a real panel.
A different way to add my reflection on this is to say also that one thing you cannot do on Zoom is flirt.
Yeah.
And I mean, flirt is
never tried it.
It's a playful interaction that really presupposes the co-presence of two bodies in the same place. And it presupposes the ability to play with appearances, with having a self in a Goffmanian situation, having a self, presenting the self, playing with the self, and understanding how someone else is also presenting him or herself. So the presentation of self, which is really fundamental to human interaction, what Goffman called the presentation of self, how we get dressed, how we carry ourselves, all of this is completely neutralized in a Zoomified world.
Not if you have a bookshelf in the background. It's also a construction of yourself.
This is now a world populated by talking heads only.
Sorry, Ivan?
This is a world populated by talking heads only.
Right, exactly.
No flirts, no jokes, and no coffee breaks. So maybe all the Zoom world is just about damage control. Maybe we can stay for a moment with the concept of being at home, because you all mentioned it in different ways. You do work, or you worked from home. You can no longer travel. And Ivan said you had to decide where your home is. And to your own surprise, if I got it right, you made the experience that you went from Vienna, where you lived for 10 years, to your home in Bulgaria. So the question is, has the pandemic changed our perception, our idea of what it means to be at home? Eva.
I'm going to assume that being at home has two meanings, or that you imply it in two meanings. One is a very concrete one, and one is a broader one, which actually I think the German tradition likes a lot. The word Heimat, I think, reflecting that experience of being at one, or being in harmony with one's social world. I'm going to go to the practical meaning of home, the one that women are most familiar with. So, I mean, if I have to address your question, I have to say that, first of all, this idea of home is full of, is really packed with lots of meanings and symbols. The home, understand it today comes from the 19th century, and it's supposed to signal and mean a private sphere that is sealed off from the public sphere, where the authentic self is able to express itself in front of and with very close others, such as children and spouses, etc. And in that sphere also, it is a sphere where women are very present. It is the sphere that women control, in which they're supposed to beautify by their cheerful and loving presence. So home is really the place where love is, really the work. I mean, where you do really the work of love every day. And you know, the newspapers, Le Monde and the New York Times, which I read daily, were full of articles on people who found themselves at home and were telling how enjoyable they found the home, and they learned cooking and they learned astrophysics and whatnot. And so you had the sense that what people enjoyed was the fact that the home became this place with no time and no structure. So there was a kind of experience of new freedom. But I felt very quickly, I mean, I was at home, in my home with my children. My son, who is doing his PhD in Paris, came, and I was with my 3 sons at home. And I had the sense that it became very quickly actually quite oppressive. And I realized that what we call the home, this warm place full of love, is actually a place that can function really only if it is supported in the background by an enormous amount of public institutions. So, for example, the school, this is the most obvious example. Children are not supposed to stay at home, in the home. They're supposed to go to school. Men and women are not supposed to be together all the time. They're supposed each to separate each one for her own activity. So in fact, modern homes, apartments, which did not exist as such really, I mean, not as we know today in the 19th century, are not places where you live in, they are places you come back to. Mm-hmm. And that is very different. And here we had an experience of a home, let's say in the 17th century, where men and women lived together all the time with children and servants on a plot of land. They worked together, they raised children together. And so the home had a very different function. This is where you stayed. But modern homes are really not places where you stay. And what actually I was made aware of, to respond to your question, was how much, and understand me, I'm not complaining because I'm one of those extremely fortunate persons who have a large home. And I have even a garden, which was, a blessing in the 6 months I was practically locked down. But I really realized how much dependent we were on these public structures. And so when I was at home, I really did not feel at home in the world, to take the German expression, precisely because the sociality, this movement of back and forth between the public and the private sphere was neutralized, was actually non-existent. And so it was not only because the freedom was curtailed and it felt like house arrest, but rather because the home is really a home only when it is sustained by a very vibrant public sphere, which did not exist any longer.
I would completely agree to that, because actually, when I said I have 3 children, 14, 16, and 18, and I was very happy not to have small children, because I'm full of admiration of people who are in their home, maybe without a garden, maybe without a balcony, with small children. I think this must have been the the biggest challenge of, in my opinion, from the COVID times for people who had to stay at home. In our family, my wife went to work. I think she did not stay in home office because I think she immediately understood the same thing as you said, Eva, that it's not good to be home the whole time. So she was out of the house. I was at home with the children, and the structure that school normally gives, I missed very much. So I started to give them tasks. Yeah, I woke them up at 10. Don't tell anybody, but I woke them up at 10 because they would have slept even longer, I think. And then I said, today you have to do this, 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 this. And at 5 o'clock, the apartment has to be cleaned because my wife will come home. So this was the arrangement we had in our family, but this was the only structure. And I missed very much the school structure, and I think the children too, without admitting it. And the climax of this, that my son, my oldest son, he had his final exams, and he had this big celebration, formal celebration in his school, and we watched the live stream with my middle son. So it was very strange. You see the children in school in the highest, they get their Abitur, what we say in German, yeah, the final exams with a very formal ceremony with all directors, but the parents were not there. And so this was a strange feeling for me that this interaction between public and private did not work very well. And I was very happy that the lockdown then in June was dissolved a little bit, and we went to holidays, we went to Toscana into a house. This was very important for the family not to stay at home for these months, because I think I would agree, as Eva said, the home can be felt when there's a public sphere outside which structures or which makes you come back from, so that you appreciate the special quality of home. And this in COVID time was I think, disrupted.
I mean, we are speaking in, Eva mentioned it, we are speaking in the privileged position of having apartments, of having houses, and having the space. But although we are in this privileged position, if I got you right, there is, and maybe that's a question to Ivan, there seems to be no much freedom in this way of working from home, being at home.
So this is one, and this is the definition of prison, which Brodsky is giving, is not very different than definition of home. You have kind of a deficit of space and abundance of time. And on one level, this COVID. This is very important, this balance between time and space. So it depends on how long you're going into this, because I saw three kind of different things. For the family in the beginning, it was critically important because you have the feeling that you go through something which is extraordinary together. And this is very strong. The kids all the time were telling it. I have 19-year-old and 11-year-old, they're saying, we're always going to remember it. Mm-hmm. As we know from history, the pandemics are not well remembered, because there is not a good narratives about them. But for them, we have been together is something which is not usually. So at one and the same time, the home was the least everyday thing. And I do believe this was very important. I do believe it was important for my wife, for me, for the kids. The second interesting story about this story of home is, I discovered how important is home as a language in which we're discussing all this. Because one of the things that happened to all of us in the beginning is that normally the modern individual lives with basically death living next door, and we are never keeping the door open. So you know that it is there, but we try basically to keep it separate. And then comes this pandemics and they open the door. And we start to live with the idea of the death in the same room. And from this point of view, on what kind of a language you're discussing all these issues is not unimportant. I realize, I don't speak German, unfortunately. We're living in Vienna for a long time. I love the city. But then you have the feeling that in a moment of crisis, for you it's so important to be in your own language. So talking about home, this is also home. You have the feeling that you cannot speak about these important things on a language which is not the one that you feel that you can express yourself fully. And the third thing that came, and I very much agree with Eva on this, now, for some of us it was quite interesting. For me, staying home is writing, because I prefer to write at home. So the moment when I get at home, in order to escape from the idea that I'm imprisoned there, I took the offer to write this book, because otherwise you don't know what exactly you're doing at home. I mean, not on an everyday life. For people, and we have been in a really deep Bulgarian countryside, one of the biggest paradoxes I see is the following. Listen, this is a depopulated area, very rural area. People are not preoccupied about thinking about the world. And then comes this pandemic. And they go home. And they stay home and they watch television. And suddenly they start to be interested in things that they have never been interesting to them. For example, how many people are infected in Brazil? How many people are dying in the United States? So the moment when we have been locked in our apartments, suddenly we start to live in a bigger world. Suddenly we see a common world. Suddenly you start to understand that a virus coming from China can change your everyday life in a dramatic way. So I saw this as a major paradox of all this experience, that you get more cosmopolitan being locked in your apartment for many people than basically when you have the possibility to travel.
But the question for me on this point is, do people see this as a uniting factor? Yeah, do they see what's going on in the other countries as something which unites us and which makes us a part of the same global history, the same global situation? Or do they see it, as I felt in the beginning, under the perspective, does our country do the right thing in comparison to other countries concerning the COVID-19 pandemic? Does our health system, is it better than the health system in the United States or not? Or what about Brazil? So is it something which unites us, or is it something which not divides us even more, but makes the difference between countries or nations more clear? This I would ask you, because I was asking this question to myself a lot of times. And in the beginning, I thought it was just like the Olympics in a negative way. Oh, they have more infected people, so our country does better. So I'm not quite sure about it. Maybe now the level of solidarity also over the countries has grown, but in the beginning, I felt it a little bit differently.
No, you're right. But in a certain way, this question, is it uniting or dividing? Honestly speaking, this is not the question that normally people ask themselves. First of all, what they understand in a crisis like this is how many people that they know live outside of the country. Suddenly you understand that there are Bulgarians in the United States or even in Brazil. You start talking about this and that. And the fact that you are in the same, also the televisions are arranged like this, that you're going to have reports from which you're much more interested in what is happening to the Bulgarians in the US than in the US as a whole. But secondly, you're absolutely right, because the sport was banned as a result of the COVID-19. And by the way, this is a major change. And people are so much used to watch competition, that competition between the governments of dealing with the pandemic has very much replaced it. It was a kind of an Olympics. And some countries has the feeling that they're succeeding, and some countries has the feeling that they're losing, and they're trying to find the explanations for this. But on the other side, I found this quite interesting, because the governments paradoxically have been very empowered on one level by the pandemics. They can do as if everything that they want because people are ready to trust them. But on the other, it was this dictatorship of comparisons that were keeping government basically also extremely vulnerable. Anytime you should try to explain why others are doing better than you, why they're doing things that you're not doing, why they're basically imposing certain measures that you're not imposing. And I found this kind of a comparison games particularly important also for the political dimension of this.
If I may interject something small, and I really don't, I'm in agreement with both of you. I'm not sure. I mean, of course, Ivan, you're right. There is this cosmopolitan awareness that some people did not have. But I would say cosmopolitan, for me, was not here the relevant category. It was more new planetary awareness that was, but planetary really is not cosmopolitan, because I and I think others, became aware that we were living on a planet with almost physical and biological properties, which of course I knew about, but I never thought about. And I think that was for me really a very new experience, to think of myself and of all of us as living in one same planet. That's why I would predict, this is in parentheses, I would predict that green politics is going to come very strong out of this. But it's going to come strong because something about the awareness of us living in a material world and a planet that has physical properties that we do not master, but which can master us, which can completely control our lives. I think this has erupted. Israel is a country in usually where green issues are completely inexistent. I mean, nobody cares or even thinks about the warming up of the planet. And suddenly, I think even in Israel, this awareness that you cannot escape the material physical world became much more important. So in that sense, I think we lived in a world that was much more, I don't know if united, because united often implies an act of will, but which by default, I mean, this is what happened. But also, I think in terms of politics, it's the first time really in history where you had an extraordinary amount of imitation from one country to the other. Of course, there are variations from country to country. There were enormous variations, but on the whole, it was a world policy. This idea of confining this, every single result, every single piece of knowledge about the virus that was published in one country became available immediately all over the world. It's the first time that we really manage a pandemic with a sense of, even if chaotic, but world policy. It was a world policy. So much so that Sweden, which went a different path, was endlessly discussed on the media. So for me, it's neither, I mean, we can discuss this issue of uniting or fragmenting, but there are aspects about it that are completely novel, namely the fact that we operated with an awareness of the world as a single unit of the end of the planet, as an entity with physical property, which we did not control. Really, for the first time, at least in my lifetime, this is the first time I became aware of these.
But the question for me is, why didn't people feel like that before? I mean, we know of ecological destruction, we know of big fires, we know of melting of the poles, and still people didn't feel this planetary feeling of what you are describing. And I think the difference is that if you don't use a mask, you see an immediate effect, or you think that there's an immediate effect on rising numbers in COVID-19. Whereas if you drive a diesel car, the effect is not, the effect is not immediate and immediately visible. So the question from this for me is, can we transfer this planetary feeling? Can we really transfer it to a green politics when COVID is over, when we come back to the fact that our immediate action is not completely visible in ecological destruction? So I think I would be very happy to take this feeling over there, but I have my certain doubts.
I also want to go back to, because I found this very important, what Eva said. The world was synchronized. It happened in 2 weeks.
Exactly.
Simply, this was the problem of time. The level of urgency was different.
Exactly.
It's also quite interesting why everybody was doing the same. In 1921, and this was just after the Spanish flu, Frank Knight, the Chicago economist, wrote an important book making distinctions between uncertainty and risk. He said, of course, we all are in the business of calculating risks, but there are moments in which you don't know anything about how to react. You cannot make any calculation. And then you are first working with the worst case scenario. But secondly, particularly if you're a democratic government, you try to do what others are doing, because even if you're going to fail, you don't want to be accused of doing something different. And from this point of view, Sweden is really amazing on the level of self-confidence. It doesn't matter are they right or wrong, but you should be very self-confident to say, I'm doing something different.
Absolutely, Ivan. And if I may continue with François Ewald, I think he was a philosopher. He's a philosopher, François Ewald, who really said about risk that, in fact, modern governments are really forced almost to react and sometimes overreact to events because modern politicians are held accountable. And you always want to do something as opposed to not doing or doing less. This is why there is often these overreactions to, say, terror attacks or violence, etc. It's because there is a pressure on modern politicians to be perceived as doing something. It could very well be, and some voices from the medical establishment, certainly in Israel, are starting to express deep doubt about the policy that has been conducted by the world. But that may be for another meeting.
On this, just one, because I very, very much agree with you on something very important. The only thing that citizens are never going to forgive you if you're not acting.
Exactly.
From this point of view, this, by the way, explains closing of the borders.
Exactly.
When you don't know what to do, you're doing something symbolic, because by doing this, you're taking responsibility. And saying, I'm responsible for the people within these borders. I cannot be responsible for everything. And this is, I very much agree that this is critically important, because COVID, and this is what the states are doing, they're redistributing incomes, but mostly they're redistributing risks.
They're redistributing what?
Risk to different groups. All the COVID-19 was basically how much risk different groups are going to take, how exposed you are going to be. And as a result of it, from this point of view, when it comes to society, COVID-19 is affecting in the same way on the individual body. All the pre-existing conditions are there. I was today basically learning certain things about the vulnerability of Central and East European public health system. We knew for a long time that exodus of people was a problem for some of these societies. And then you see that the exodus of the doctors has become the biggest problem for countries like the Czech Republic or Hungary or Poland, to the extent that the head of the Czech medical associations appealed to the Czech doctors working outside of the country to come back because they cannot deal with. Out of 1,200 students who graduate medicine every year in Hungary, in 2018, 900 went to work abroad. And we knew that basically there was the problem, that one side of this was the possibilities that personally these people benefited a lot, but suddenly this kind of exposure, for example, Poland is the EU member state with the lowest ratio of medical professionals to 100,000 people. All these things became visible as a result of COVID-19.
Maybe let's. I try to get an idea what it means. We don't want to speculate too much about the future, but you are speaking about this synchronization of a global experience. You speak about the growing planetary awareness. This was your word, Eva. But the pandemic hit the world and our societies in a moment when globalization was under pressure or is under pressure, when internationalism is under pressure, when a new nationalism was there. So I tried to I really would like to step into your optimistic, in your rather optimistic outlook, but I tried to connect this analysis of the world, how it was before, a world of growing fragmentation, of more nationalism, and this growing or stronger planetary awareness you were speaking about now. What does it mean for the, or is there any chance to say what does it mean for the future? I don't know.
Listen, first, I have never been accused of excessive optimism. This is the first time I'm joking. Listen, and you're right, but we always believe that the world should go in one direction, either being more integrated or being more fragmented. And my feeling about COVID-19 is that we are running in all directions at the same time.
Absolutely.
Because in a certain way, it was not a disruptor, it was an amplifier by a certain trends that were there before. Fragmentation is there and it is going to stand. At the same time, on the level of the human consciousness, I do believe that Eva is right. People suddenly understood that we are much more connected, dependent to each other. It does not mean that we like it, because interdependence is also vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Interdependence means that I was reading certain statistics, which, honestly speaking, were even shocking for me. It appeared that 180 of the key trade products in the world, 70% of their exports come from a single country. So suddenly it appears that certain medicine or any type of a product, because of the international specialization, is coming. It does not need to be China. It could be India. It could be Indonesia. But suddenly you discover that you're so much dependent on something that you do not have any leverage over. And I do believe this is going to stay, this feeling. Nationalism is also there, but it was also a strange nationalism. I'm trying to call it stay-at-home nationalism because it has two kinds of dimensions. On one level, you're closing the borders. On the other level, in most of the countries, even countries that were very migration hostile just 2 years ago, people were much more inclusive towards the foreigners that have been within the country because you simply cannot afford to isolate them. You cannot say, let them get infected, because the moment they get infected, you have a problem too. At the same time, you have a strong nationalism in the first 2 weeks, and then you realize that in the way you cannot keep people in their apartments all their life, you cannot keep the economies in a closed border all the time. So the moment when we cannot get out of our houses, there were charter flights to Austria and Germany for East European labor in order to do the harvest of the asparaguses. So it was about nationalism, but it was also about the limits of nationalism. And in my view, all these things will go together. So it's not, in 1989, when there was kind of a big change, at least we have the illusion that we know in which direction the world is going. I do believe now we feel that there is a major change, but there is no this kind of a sense that we know the direction, be it one way or the other. I'm sorry, but I should open because there is an electrician coming. There is a problem with the electrician. So just a minute.
That's in the world of Zoom meetings. There is a ringing of telephone, but not only in the world of Zoom meetings. It's in another panel. It could happen as well.
So this is home office life.
This is home office life.
It's very funny.
No, I know the feeling. No, maybe I have a. Of course, I have a certain institutional point of view on this question. Yeah. I think it's right what Eva said, that we have this planetary feeling, that we have the feeling that there are certain topics that we cannot solve nationally, or that we cannot solve in communities, but that we have to solve in a multilateral international level. I think COVID is something like that. I mean, Ivan Gastev, you said how things are interconnected, and this made this very clear. So my biggest fear is that when one day this is over, we will go back to the same situation and everybody is doing the same as before. But I think we have to take this feeling or this knowledge that there are these topics. And I think it's the responsibility of an institution like ours, but like many others, like universities, like all these institutions which stand for a certain openness and internationality, that they organize processes and define what we have learned, what didn't we like, what didn't we do right, and what do we take to the other side, or what do we take to the future? What have we learned about communication? What have we learned about democracy? How do we strengthen the European Union more? Because I think that some solutions only lie in this multilateral treatment, and so I think we have to take this responsibility on us to continue these questions and to find some answers for them. And of course, it's not easy answers. It's not one big answer, but it's processes that we have to organize. And I think this will be the task if we look into the future.
So if I may add my 2 cents, I'll take your question, Matthias, into a slightly different direction. I think, well, first of all, I think we really don't know what can happen. I read a few days ago an article by Robert Nye from Harvard in Foreign Affairs, and I really liked the way he started the article, saying we need to be modest, and we need to say that at this point we really don't know what will be. So I feel very much that way. I feel I don't really know. So I can imagine 2 scenarios, not sure, by the way, they completely exclude each other. But with regard to your question, I think it could well be the mark and the sign to change course. And it could well be the sign for citizens as well as for governments that market-based models for running society have failed. And it could be the start of, I don't know, new forms of solidarity. For example, if you go to a restaurant and the place has denied sick leave to a person who is sick, you have become aware that the sickness of this person may have an influence on you, and therefore you're much more likely to take the side of the worker who did not get to have his or her sick leave. So that's just an example, but also I think the economy, it could well be that we become aware of all those areas that have been very much neglected by neoliberal policies, and that these areas, certainly health being the first, would be reinvested by the state. So this is one direction things can go in, with a very paradoxical relationship to the state. I think all of us really expected the state to manage this thing, because only the states can do that. So there was a dependence on the state, I think, that was not seen for the last decade. And at the same time, with a great deal of defiance and mistrust in the state. And this is true in Israel, this is true in France, I think it has been true in many places, but it could be that we are seeing a renewal of the state as the only entity capable of uniting and managing this type of crisis. Another scenario is the one that Naomi Klein describes as being a pandemic shock doctrine. That is, this catastrophe, and it's a major catastrophe, will be the occasion for some very strong actors, mostly the new tech corporations, to become not only even stronger. This we already see, this is here, there is nothing to speculate about, but to actually control us in ways that would have otherwise taken maybe a decade or two. And so it's whether it's telehealth or teleworking or shopping at home, etc. This could very well mark, in fact, a turn for those corporations to finally really dominate our societies. This is a scenario we should think about seriously. So that would be my way of thinking about your question. Matthias.
Thank you very much, because so it's the option between more solidarity or more control, and maybe it happens, as Ivan said, all at the same time. Or Ivan, you want to?
Yeah, I also wanted to say that, of course, future is the invasion of the unknown, and just trying to predict is not going to help us much. But what struck me about the state was two things. People, of course, relied on the state. At the same time, they expect from the state not so much to govern the economy, but they see the state as a stockpile state. The state should have in reserve everything that we are going to need for the next crisis. We don't know what is going to be the next crisis, but it should be there. And at the same time, they had the feeling that they're individual, that we're powerless in this big world, but even our state are powerless. Look at the nature of the conspiracy theories. They are not national. There was always been proliferation of conspiracy theories, but suddenly conspiracy theories became global. 5G, a certain type of personalities. And I do believe this is the interesting, and for me, this is the most important, central for the time we're living in. On one level, probably, in individual sense, we are freer than any previous generation. But then we have the feeling that we are losing power. And there was a break between our sense of power, individual, as a voters, as a citizens, and the sense of freedom. Our freedom depends on somebody else. Our freedom basically is not about us. And this is why, for me, it was quite interesting to see the power of the different type of a protest that you can see. Good or bad protest, it doesn't matter. But exactly because during the COVID-19, it is so irrational to go in the street, to create a crowd, suddenly these crowds became very powerful in different places, be it in the United States for something, be in Israel for something totally different. In Bulgaria, we had 400-day protests. So this kind of a decoupling between the sense of individual power and freedom, I found being extremely strongly exposed by this virus.
If you are looking like you want to say something? No.
No. I completely agree with Ivan with what I said before.
I mean, with like in a magic scenario, we are now when it comes to the end of the discussion, we are at the question of the festival, which is the state of freedom in Europe. And I mean, maybe for our last round, some last reflections on, if I put it very simply, I apologize for the simplicity. Will we be, or with the pandemic and after the lockdown, that's the title of the discussion, will we be, in which way will we be more free or less free? I mean, it's options if I got it right. Johannes, maybe.
I think the big, I mean, what we saw in the pandemic concerning freedom, that it was possible very fast under the circumstances of the pandemic to reduce freedom. Everybody most of the people accepted that because they felt this solidarity for the others, because they thought that the science knew what was going on and knew the right answers. And but then after a certain time, people started to say, okay, our freedom is reduced, we have to wear these masks, we cannot go out, our personal freedom is restricted. And I think in some countries even this situation was used we are dealing a lot with civil society actors in the arts and in education to reduce their freedom because their financial resources were not there anymore. So I think this was a really big problem and will be a big problem in the future. So what I think we have to be very careful not to reduce freedom too much. And what I would say for Germany is that the parliament at a certain point should get a bigger say in all these measures that we are taking right now. So I think it's a little bit, and Ivan Gastiev was talking about the demonstrations. I think that these demonstrations were important and good as long as they were not used by fascist or radical rights for their aims. I think it was important that the individuals said, okay, we are not happy with the reduction of freedom. So for the future, there will be this balance of solidarity for the others. And because of that, we are ready to reduce our own freedom. But on the other hand, we should be very aware and very careful to challenge back these freedoms, to demand them from the politicians, who are actually, many of them, doing a good job, and as I see in Germany. But still, we have to be very careful that the reduction of freedom does not get the new normal, but that we are sensitive enough to ask these freedoms or to demand these freedoms, which are very important for a liberal democracy. And I think this is a challenge and the responsibility that we all have.
If again, you were looking at...
Yeah, I think we should be careful about contextualizing the word freedom, because, if you raise this question in Israel, or in Europe or in the United States, the implications are very different. Interestingly enough, the people defending freedom today in the United States is the extreme right, as you know, using it as a way to justify their refusal to wear masks. And I would say that Europe, by and large, has taken not a path of freedom, but of promoting, this rejoins what Johannes was saying, a path of social responsibility, which follows, I think, in fact, the model of negative freedom that is at the heart of liberal theory. Negative freedom, you remember, as Aya Berlin defined it, is I have the freedom to do what I want as long as I don't hurt someone else. And I think this is exactly what is now in question. In Israel, for example, the ultra-Orthodox religious, exactly like the ultra-right, the alt-right in the United States, are using this idea of freedom and connecting it, of course, as it was originally, to the idea of worshipping and the idea of the freedom of belief. And the ultra-Orthodox have used it to reopen the schools, their schools, in defiance of the school directives, of the government directives to close them down. So freedom is used, in fact, by some populations as a way to trample their responsibility towards others and on government sanitary policies. So, in a way, what we're witnessing is a complete transformation, and almost, we're seeing a complete transformation and abuse of the word freedom during this crisis. And in a way, we are touching the limits of freedom, because what is at stake in everybody's freedom is precisely the responsibility that we bear to other people. And religious ultra-Orthodox people in Israel are more or less behaving as if they bore no responsibility at all towards other human beings, and they said it only to their God. This is what they feel mostly responsible for. And so I think we reach here kind of a limit of liberalism. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm going very much to agree, because there was a very strong libertarian instinct that was triggered. You should oppose anything that the government is doing. Freedom is basically trying to constrain the government regardless of the motivation and so on, because simply the government became much more visible. The government basically started to restrict in a classical way, which normally the liberal governments are not doing. So I agree that the major impact on freedom is going to redefine what we do mean by freedom. Because the other impact of this is, at least for my generation, the idea of freedom was very much related to the freedom of movement. This is crossing borders. And suddenly you cannot do it anymore because of pandemics, because of fear of this. And as a result of it, these things that you cannot basically run away, and on the other, that you should decide to support the government or not doing this. The most interesting protests, in fact, are the protests of people who believe that the governments are right on restricting people to basically assemble together, but nevertheless, they're doing this for other reasons. For example, the people in Belarus who went on the street, they're not protesting the restriction of the governments, they're protesting something different, the governments that is not taking care of their interests. And I do believe this is a different conversations, and this also very much reminds me of an old piece of artistic installation from Hungary from 1970s. And there was a cage, and the bird in the cage, and the door of the cage was open, but it was closing only when you tried to get out. And I do believe kind of a issue in a moment like this.
Thank you, Ivan. This is, I take it as the final word, but today there are no final words, there are no final answers in this discussion and in this debate, but thank you so much, because I think there were a lot of really interesting, fruitful, useful insights, ideas, concepts, and I'm not going to try to sum it up. Maybe the best idea would be I really would appreciate to meet in a couple of months again, maybe maybe next year at that time. And
at the coffee machine.
Huh?
At the coffee machine.
And to Johannes Ebert raises his fingers. So maybe it's an idea. No, we will continue in whatever formats, and maybe sometime again in personal. We will continue this debate and this discussion. For today, I thank you very much, Johannes Ebert in Munich, Ivan Krastev in Vienna, and Eva Illus in Paris. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hello again, and welcome back to the studio in Thessaloniki. I don't know, this was a really interesting discussion, and I feel that it touched upon a lot of really interesting points. So I'm really curious to see the first response through her live drawing that Carol Rollo prepared.
Let's see.
Okay, I think I caught a few words.
Absolutely, that was a great impression, actually.
Who's winning, amplifier, COVID, truth or dare. So before we move on to the next video that we're gonna see, I would like to read very briefly a comment that we received from Beata in Poland. Salut from Poland. Thousands of women, despite the pandemic threat, are defending their freedom in the streets against the decision of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal to ban abortion even when there is a high risk of severe and irreversible fetal abnormalities. We are protesting against the cruelty to women, and I support you. You can read more about Poland's tragic situation. COVID is used as a shield. I think that was also something that was commented by the speakers in the previous panel. COVID is used as a shield in battle with women. We need European solidarity more than ever. So thank you, Beata, for sending this over. I think that we will also have a new opportunity to talk about these issues related to women and the home when we hear Professor Iluc's keynote tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.
Because she touches also upon these issues. But to move on, we are going to show now the first artistic intervention that was selected through the open call that we announced for the Freiraum Festival a few months ago. So we invited young, emerging and established artists to submit their proposals for artistic interventions that would comment on both the theme of the Freiraum Festival, the two themes, but also on the exploration of new formats that we are kind of forced into now. So we received a lot of really interesting proposals from all over the world, from Indonesia to the United States. The curatorial committee actually selected 8 of them by artists from Greece, Germany, Italy, Spain, Poland, UK, and the United States. I would like to thank everybody for submitting the proposals and also those who were finally selected. So the first of these works that we're going to show is titled Shining Europe. It was conceived especially for the festival, and it is by artists Christoph Rummel and Jochen Merker. Λίγο γέρνο, We will close the opening evening of the Freiraum Festival with the Freiraum Rhapsody. This is a concept that was developed by Edith Pula. She is the Tirana-based Freiraum partner. And it was composed especially for a 13-piece orchestra by Fatos Kerimai. Edith envisioned this piece as the soundtrack for the Freiraum project, but also as a response to fundamental European values. It was actually performed a few hours ago live in Tirana, in the center of the city, and we will now watch a performance of it at the Beaux-Arts in Brussels. It will be introduced by Paul Dujardin, who is the director of the Beaux-Arts, in conversation with Floris Lamens, the conductor, of the performance. As we will be now moving to Brussels, we will, and for this musical closing, we will also say goodbye to you from Thessaloniki for today. So thank you for watching, and we will come back to you tomorrow at 2 o'clock Central European Time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. So let's relax now and see this wonderful concluding Freiraum Rhapsody.
So, dear virtual audiences, dear colleagues and dear friends, I'm greeting you from our wonderful Salle Henri Leboeuf at the Center for Fine Arts, Beaux-Arts in Brussels. The opening evening of the Freiraum Festival, organized by the Goethe Institute in collaboration with Beaux-Arts and the Beursfabrik, was supposed to take place here tonight, but due to the COVID pandemic and the new health and sanitary measures, all cultural events have to be, unfortunately, cancelled in the capital of Europe. But as there is no such thing as a lockdown for art and culture, I'm very pleased that the Freiraum Rhapsody can still be recorded here at the Center for Fine Arts in Beaux-Arts and shared with you at least virtually. It's my great pleasure to give the floor to the conductor Floris Lamens, who will introduce the piece. And I wish you a pleasant listening experience safely from your homes. Thank you.
Thank you.